Maybe we should wait. We got a line. There's still people waiting. Folks, it's 6 o'clock, but we're going to wait just a few minutes because I can see there's a line of people still coming in. So we're just going to give a few more minutes for folks to be able to get in and have a seat. All right, good evening, folks. I know we've got a couple more people out there in the hallway, but I'm going to go ahead and say hello and thank you for coming out. Love to see so many people here, and we're really excited. This is our public draft presentation of ZOCO, which is our zoning code. And my name is Brian Rose. I'm the city planner for the city. I've got my staff here to help me, my planning staff, as well as our consultants from TPUDC, Town Planning and Urban Design Collaborative. Brian Wright is the principal of the firm there. And so I'm not going to spend a ton of time going through much because I know we're all really, really excited to hear about the public draft. This has been a project that started basically right when I got here, at least after the contract was signed. Of course, the contract portion took a couple of years to get going too. So we've really been in this process already for 3.5 years almost. So I'm really excited that we've gotten to this point. We're on the home stretch, and to me, that's pretty exciting to see where we've come. So anyway, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Brian Wright, who is, again, our consultant with TPUDC.
Thanks. Hello, everybody. How many first timers we have? People who've not participated in any zoning stuff so far. Okay, awesome. That's great. So, as Brian said, I'm also Brian, no relation, but got some introductions here. So, I'm going to kick off the presentation, but I've got two other folks with me, and they're going to jump in and give you some of the details. But I've got Bill Wright, who is a relation. He's my dad, has the same last name as me. And he is a zoning expert and land use attorney. And then I have Anna Blevins here, and she's your project manager. And the two of them have been really embedded in this and know it inside and out. I've been fortunate enough to just mostly get to interact with the public and get to kind of weigh in from time to time on things and thoughts and get to interface with staff sometimes, but they are the experts on your ordinance. So we're going to get into that here. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of zoning 101. So, I'm not going to, you may all be experts on zoning, just in general, but I'm going to pretend that you're not. But anyway, zoning are really the rules and regulations that are set up to implement the vision that's in your comprehensive plan. And so, in order for us to kick off this process, we looked at the comprehensive plan and move forward with the assumptions that are in there. And the zoning groups land into different categories. The rules and regulations about what you can build in each zone, but it doesn't make anything be built, right? It just says if you're going to do something on this piece of property, it's located in, let's say it's purple on the map, you can do these things with it. And so as we go through this process now, just note that we're creating opportunities for things to happen, but if you own a piece of property, it's not saying you have to go now do something different than you're doing with your property. So what is zoning, right? So zoning can give you all sorts of things. Zoning can create a place like this, like where people are actually might go on vacation to visit and sit in this little cafe and drink some coffee or something. But zoning can also give you a place like this. And I don't know, I started the firm 20 years ago, and we work all over the country, and I've yet to work in any city where they said, we want this, right? This is never at the top of people's preferences. And, some of these businesses aren't even still around Circuit City. But even though Circuit City is gone, all of the rest of that is still there. You get kind of stuck with it for quite a long period of time, and until people start to want to redevelop things. So typically, when somebody's proposing a development, you start seeing articles in the paper, stop signs for development, and people come out with signs and they're against development, and many times they may not even know what the development is. They're just like, it's certainly going to be bad. Of course, you see the last slide I just showed, right? So why would I be in favor of development? And so, a lot of times the development communities kind of like brought that upon themselves, and so that's okay. But in the past, it was a different case. Actually, this statue, if you look in his hand here, he's holding a set of blueprints. This statue was built in honor of the developer of what is now its own town. It's called Coral Gables. It's part of like those, like neighborhood of Miami, if you will. But the people of Coral Gables built this because this developer created such an amazing place, and now it's a place that's very desirable. So you probably don't see many developer statues being built anymore these days, but in my work around the country, I say, well, what do you want? What do you want for your town? And people, say things like, oh, I'd like to, be more like Mayberry, right? And ironically it says, do not copy. Well, this is actually where the Andy Griffith Show was filmed. This is the back lot, and it was a copy of a small town, right? And so that's what people like about sort of the Andy Griffith experience and the authenticity of it, ironically, as a TV show, and that sort of simpler life. And so when we work in a lot of places like, towns and cities around Nashville, people think of it more like, we moved here because we wanted to be more like a Mayberry kind of lifestyle. Unfortunately, back to my earlier point about the signs, not in favor of development, while the citizens may say we want Mayberry, this is more what the citizens get, because the developer, your town is built development by development, except for the historic districts that kind of were built over time in a more organic way and in an old way, in a way that encouraged things that are different than this. And I'm sure this is a fine subdivision, right? It was, but it's, for most people, it isn't what, if you showed them side by side, the sort of the historic downtown neighborhood versus this, most people would pick the other, which is why often the historic neighborhoods are more expensive places to live than the newer neighborhoods. So moving into commercial zones, right? So who knows where this is? This could be anywhere. It probably couldn't be here because we don't have palm trees here. But if you replace those palm trees with Bradford pears, maybe it could be here, right? And so, this is a particularly unflattering view. They kind of have not really kept up with the maintenance there. And so here's a better version of that. And if you look in the foreground here, this says Beautification Award. And so I've always wondered, how Burger King beat out Express Oil Change and McDonald's and Hardee's for that. Did they have the best pansies and petunias and most perfectly spherical boxwoods over there? But either way, this is a pretty low bar if we're giving beautification awards for a place like this, right? The thing about conventional zoning is that it separates all uses from each other, right? So you have these pods, so a shopping pod, you have an office pod, and so you see office parks and things often. You have a school pod. You have residential single-family pods, and sometimes, a multifamily residential pod. And, again, multifamily these days in most people's mind is sort of what we refer to as an apartment complex. And it's sometimes uses kind of have to bump up next to each other because you sort of, as you go. And so here, when that happens, you'll see between the housing pod and the shopping pod, they have a fence between them, and they also have a vegetated buffer to make sure that if you live in that house right there, you can't possibly get over to the shop you want to go to. And so instead, you've got to get in your car and drive in the cul-de-sac and go out there and come down and get on the arterial and clog it up. And, and so we're causing and requiring people to get in their car for every single thing that they do. And, ultimately what happens is the heart wants what the heart wants. And so the people who live over there actually cut a hole in the fence and they just go through. And they say, I'm going to walk, 30 seconds instead of driving 30 minutes to get there. So they didn't used to separate uses. They used to make towns and villages and hamlets. And so here you have, the town square, that's sort of the heart of civic activity. You have civic uses like the church there. You would have businesses on the ground floor and people would live above. Maybe it's the shop owner. Maybe it's somebody who didn't want to or couldn't afford a house. And so they had an apartment above the shop. And then as you moved out of the town square, you started having more just sort of purely single family, smaller lots though. And then as you moved to the edges, the lots got bigger, the houses are set back further, etc. And so you sort of sometimes would progress through the community as your different preferences and needs change throughout your life. And today, if you move into a neighborhood, you have to move to a new neighborhood each time your lifestyle preferences and situations change, and so it's kind of a different experience. And this could end up on a postcard. Most of the places that we build today, like the bird's eye view of all the cul-de-sacs, it probably is not going to be on a postcard, right? And people come to town to visit. You might take them to show them our nice little town square. You're not going to take them to show them that commercial strip highway, even with its beautification award, right? So in addition, we also separate the housing pods from one another, typically by income. We say, well, these are all the houses that are in the, let's say $200,000 range, and these are all the $300,000, and these are $100,000 condos over there. What happens in reality, though, is that like people who live in this neighborhood actually work with people who live in this neighborhood. and they're friends. They like each other at work. They don't need guards and gates and, fences to keep them separated. And then maybe the school teacher that teaches their kids lives right there. And so the way they used to do it was they mixed it all together. And so here you can see multifamily buildings here, townhouses here, and single family houses here. And that's all on the same block. This is in Georgetown, right outside of Washington, D.C., where all the senators and everybody, like some of the highest property values in the country, that's how they used to do it. And it's still some of the highest property values in the country. They didn't feel the need to separate based on, well, you don't want to have your house near the houses that are less expensive. And so there's all these sort of real estate myths that go into it. But the same kind of situation with working as well. So, this is how people used to work. So they would have shops, and sometimes you have an office above. And now we tend to be more in these sort of office parks. And I love this image. This is actually an artist rendering, not one of ours, but and there's a theoretical pedestrian here right next to the 18-wheeler whizzing right past them, So there's probably not such a great walking experience. And if you want to go get some lunch on your lunch break, you've got to get in your car and drive over to, Ruby Tuesdays or whatever. Whereas here you walk, down and you go and pick one of the cafes on your street here. And it's you have now extra time because you weren't waiting in traffic to sit on the bench and contemplate your future, or whatever. So civic space was also, open space was different. This is what open space used to be. It was, like I said, the park, the town square, these sorts of things, or, agriculture and whatnot. So often we'll see zoning ordinances where the requirement is for open space, and it's got to be X% of your land will be dedicated as a penalty for developing in open space. And so the developers say, okay, fine. I didn't like that part of my property anyway. It's not very usable. It's just sort of the back of stuff. And now you come over here and you're going to can I throw a Frisbee over here? Are they going to call the police because I'm in the back of their yard or whatever? And so things change. Parades happen here. They start and end here. This is where festivals happen, that open space. And I think they even spray painted it just to make it look green. So I'm not sure. Streets, the design of streets also is important. As we have moved forward over the years, our streets get wider and wider, right? Of course, they needed to because we aren't just having horses and people walk down them. We have cars now, but they're a bit excessive, So this is obviously a street that a person would feel totally comfortable walking down, but a car could still navigate. This is a street. It's like a road between two apartment complexes, and it's the width of an interstate highway. I mean, think how many of these Jettas you could fit across here, right? Is this like 10 lanes or something? I don't know. We didn't Photoshop that image. But people don't feel comfortable walking down beside a road like that, and cars feel very, very comfortable speeding on a road like that. Can you imagine if you're out on the interstate and the speed limit said 35? You would feel ridiculous, right? Because it's designed wide enough that I'm totally comfortable driving fast. There's a psychology that goes to it as well. Getting into the details, even the radius at the intersection, right? So a car coming up next to this guy has to come to nearly a complete stop before it can make that turn. Otherwise, it's not going to be able to stay in its lane. Whereas the gremlin here, I guess I don't know what that is. You can see it's still leaning with centrifugal force as it doesn't even touch its brakes. And imagine if this poor guy were standing right here, it's quite a different experience. And so these little details are even important. And believe it or not, this is not an ad for red pumps, right? This is stormwater infrastructure gone wrong, right? So, that's a bit excessive, but I'm sure, this is some sort of a tropical climate and the water needs to go in there, but maybe there's a different way you could have done that. The design of buildings also becomes important as a identifying feature of your community. So this says cars live here. And this is actually the front of these houses. This is not an alley, right? Cars live here. This says people live here. And so, however, so often you see this as a common type of design that you get in new developments, sort of the garage forward. And, many of you may live in homes like this, and it's surely a fine experience. This experience is really fine, right? And it's also really fine for everyone who's going to go by here and walk past here, not just for you who's going in. And, I would often wonder, where is the front door on these houses? And I think that is it. But I like it to be more obvious. And it certainly is a bit more postcard friendly. Do people do postcards anymore? I don't know. So Instagram worthy, maybe that's what I should say. So here's kind of the difference in how we used to do things in a traditional pattern and how we do things today. And so the idea is, you were creating these walkable and compact mixed use places that were diverse because they had a bunch of different housing types in them. People could live, different price points, and it all fit together to make what we would think of as a great little historic town. And today, as I was saying, separating all these uses, so every single trip you get in, you've got to get on the collector road. If there's an accident over here, you're in deep trouble because you're stuck now. And so here, there's so many of these roads that connect together. You can go a multitude of ways depending on kind of where you want to go, where you need to go, and what the road conditions are at the moment. So in going through the process, I mentioned earlier we reviewed the existing zoning ordinance, which was more conventional, right? That's why I show you the two different ways of thinking of the sort of the separating of uses and all that. That's kind of where you came from. And so we looked at the old ordinance, the comprehensive plan, the major thoroughfare plan, and all of the other documents that regulate how you all move forward and build things. And then we talked with planning staff and commissioners and council members and, got goals and all of that as well. We toured around all over the city, looking around to the, obviously in the downtown to the hinterlands and everything in between. We had lots of opportunities for public engagement. So everybody, so I was asking who's been here before or hasn't been here before. And then, we created our client draft, which is what we're releasing here today and giving you an overview. So the staff reviewed it and gave us lots and lots of comments. It was great. They were you should be very proud of your staff. They were very thorough. And so we have made updates to create the public draft to move forward. So as I mentioned, we had these opportunities for public input. We had a community kickoff back in June of 2024, well attended. And we talked about some, sort of what's going to happen, what's coming, and some of the big ideas. Then we had our Planapalooza in July, and that's when we brought our whole team. We set up shop here for from Friday through Monday. We worked from right out of the awesome. What's that place called? Station. Yes, that place was amazing. I think we were the first inhabitants of it. So that was really fun. Yeah. So we went through and we had a series of topical meetings. We talked about different issues. People could come. We had presentations. We had a hands-on workshop. We had, it was just a great time. We had lots and lots of excellent participation. And we took all of the information in as we were moving forward. Some of the things that we heard, and this is just like a sampling, right? So we heard that new development should aim to preserve Gallatin's character, right? Well, what is that character? And so that was something then we had to set out to figure. And so one of the ways we figure that out is by going out around the areas that people said we love these areas in the city and measuring and documenting and understanding what is the DNA that makes up the character of Gallatin. We heard that buildings should be designed to last. And so that kind of goes together with the last one a little bit, because what we heard sort of grouping those things together was we're kind of tired of the same old cookie cutter subdivisions that we're getting over and over here that are the same as in every other city that's around here, and all the folks who are generating that. That's really not the direction we're looking to go moving forward. Now, that's easy to say as a citizen. It's a little bit harder to say as a developer or somebody who's looking to build, housing around, because, in some ways the market is what it is. People are able to pay what they're able to pay. But that said, it doesn't mean that you can have one or the other, character and built to last, or cookie cutter and not built to last, right? There are all sorts of things in between, and you can see them all over the country and all over the region where people have done something different than cookie cutter and not built to last. We heard that trees and other natural features should be preserved. It seems like there's sort of it's pretty easy to clear cut around here if you're doing a new development. It's, people said encourage traffic calming measures so people aren't driving fast, like I was showing you on those really wide roads. Having a variety of housing types and prices, and that helps in that regard. It makes it more interesting when you have a variety of housing types. Also, I didn't mention that. Gateways into the city need improvements, and we notice the same thing each time we come into town. You may have noticed it as well. And when you get stuck in traffic on the way into town, you particularly notice it. You can spend lots of time looking at the gateway needs. Accommodate for multimodal transportation infrastructure, sidewalks, bike lanes, and road improvements. So easy to get around in a car here, not as easy as a pedestrian or a cyclist. So we can improve that, is what people are asking. Expanding outdoor dining, and create meaningful public open spaces that also function as stormwater management. So maybe we don't have to have the lady stepping quite so high, and instead we have a park that can fill up when it rains, and then it naturally infiltrates in, and now our drain can just be normal height, that kind of stuff. So these are some of the things that we heard high level. So what we're going to do tonight is give you a preview of what's in the ordinance. Now, if you're hoping to come and this presentation will make it where you don't have to read the ordinance, you'll be disappointed, right? Because there's so much to it. It's impossible for us to give you an overview, or anything but an overview at this point. But it's sort of like an orientation, so that when you do sit down with it, you'll be familiar. You'll feel like, oh yeah, I heard him say that section or that thing or whatever. So just don't set your expectations where they can be met, right? So I'm going to turn it over to Bill and Anna and let them tell you all of the things that you would find in an overview about a zoning ordinance. Now, get ready. This is going to be exciting. I got to do all the fun slides, so.
Okay, I'm Bill Wright. How are you guys? I'll just go ahead and say, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. We checked our spelling in the public draft more closely than we did on this slide. We try to have the city's name spelled correctly, but there's always going to be one. There's always going to be one. Right. I didn't want you all snickering while I was up here. All right, so like Brian said, we're...
The public draft, I'm sorry to ask this, but you're giving it to us tonight. Can we read it? Do you have it?
It's going to be online.
But we're here. You're giving it to
You
us.
couldn't possibly read it right now.
No, but we could follow along, though.
No, you couldn't possibly follow along.
Public document,
It is a public document. You'll be able to see it online.
but not tonight while you're giving us this.
Is it posted yet? I don't know.
It wasn't before I came.
Okay.
Not until after the presentation, but it will be.
We try to so people aren't flipping through pages as opposed to are flipping through pages.
Informing ourselves and getting knowledge.
No, while we're presenting, that's the idea. So, like Brian said, we are presenting the public draft. It's been literally a year in making. As you saw when we started working on it, it was back in June. This is the table of contents of the document. This isn't up here for y'all to memorize it or anything else. It's just the way we're going to go through the presentation is to essentially step through at a high level the various articles. So the very first article is called General, and it's what I call the housekeeping article. It's got all the things in it that sort of ties all the rest of the articles back together. Talks about the intent of the code, how this ordinance relates to other documents that are related to development regulation, legal nonconformities, like if you have something on your land right now and you have that use going, just because we're changing this code right now doesn't mean you have to change the thing you're doing. The transition rules, just like as you know, right this second we're under old code, and there'll be a day when you're under new code, and just how the two interrelate and what happens. Vested property rights. State of Tennessee has a really strong vested property rights statute, much stronger than other states. I originally practiced law in Alabama, and there was no vested property rights statute whatsoever. You had to go dig into the cases back from the, 1870s to see whether you had a vested property right, and then just performance guarantees, and that's just the notion that you, like when a developer is building something, he's got to complete what he's building, and if he doesn't, then he loses his performance guarantee that he put up, and it's collateralized, and that's another whole big process. But that's the type of thing that's in this first article. Y'all see how exciting this is compared to what Brian was doing? And then Anna gets the second most exciting part. She's got color pictures. I get words. Second article is related to the zoning map. It incorporates the zoning map, and there'll be a new zoning map, which is essentially, to a large extent, the old zoning map with character added to it on top of it. There may be slight changes in it, but largely it's recognizable from the old one. Special requirements, if any, that are applicable to a particular lot, like whether or not a shop front frontage is required on a lot as opposed to some other kind of frontage. Several things that's probably too deep to even get into here. And then what is the zoning of newly annexed property? Article 3, the zoning districts. You guys have a number of planned developments in the city. It seems like there was a time when, and maybe even right this minute, the preferred way to go about doing development is to get a planned development approved as opposed to following the rest of the zoning code. And those were maybe a good idea 30 years ago when everybody was trying to get development to be better. Cities were trying to get development to be better. A lot of them backfired. A lot of them ended up making the process of getting property rezoned and doing development a completely negotiated concept. It's like maybe if you don't have like a bunch of great connections, maybe you don't get your project approved. Maybe if you do have a lot of great connections, you get it approved. That said, there are a bunch of existing planned development districts in the city. We can't just like uproot them and throw them away. Those are there on that property until somebody, they might abandon one, they might decide to get it rezoned, but what's on the ground there, if they got it approved right, is what's going to stay in the zoning ordinance. So we have a provision that addresses that, so those will stay in place. The article also lays out the base zoning districts and then the overlay districts that are applicable. This is your part. See how pretty her picture is?
Okay, so there's 14 districts. We're going to go through these very quickly because it's a lot to take in, but our base districts are what we call character districts because that's what we're trying to regulate is the character of Gallatin. So that's what CD stands for, and that's what you're going to see through most of these. But we start with the most rural type of district, and then we move to the most kind of urban or most dense. So CD1 is called your natural district, and this is largely land that is not suitable for development because of the topo, because of hydrology, vegetation. You're not usually going to see buildings there. So that would be the least dense option. CD2A is your agricultural district. So this is predominantly agricultural, and there's some minimal residential development. It's usually on larger lots, and you'll see some agricultural land in there as well. CD2 is rural. So similar to 2A, but a little more dense, but still very low dense, sparsely settled, single-family, detached residential areas. CD3L, this is our neighborhood. This is when you start to get into the more like kind of post-World War II type of suburban development. L just stands for large lot here, but this is your low-density single-family, larger lots, like we said, medium to deep front setbacks. Your streets may have curbs, sidewalks, street trees, and then they're usually medium to larger sized blocks. Then we get into CD3, which is neighborhood general. So if you look at the image, they're pretty similar, but the houses are a little bit taller and they're closer together, so your lots are smaller, but still low density, mostly single family, medium to deep front setbacks, kind of the same thing as 3L, just tighter. CD4 is where you start to get into the mix of uses. So we call this our neighborhood center. So with medium density, you have like a very wide range of building types and uses that are allowed here. And it's a good transition from your single family to like your downtown area. So variable private landscaping, your streets are more formal with curbs, sidewalks, and trees, and the blocks are a little bit smaller than what you would have in your 3L or your 3. 4A artisan, neighborhood artisan, this is something that we just noticed that Gallatin might be interested in having, but we specifically thought about your like Depot Square area. So it's pretty cool, it's historical, but you could kind of like do some adaptive reuse there and really revitalize the area. So A is artisan in this case. There is some housing that's allowed, and you have some artisan establishments as well as some commercial, and I believe a little bit of light industrial. But your setbacks are very similar to your CD4, landscaping, streets, all of those are the same as well. CD4C is neighborhood corridor. So there's actually no residential in this district, but think of like your large, big box type of development, suburban, usually along arterials. So this is still mixed use, but just not residential. It's a little more auto-oriented as well as pedestrian, but it really allows for kind of like developing along those large seas of parking, so you don't see the parking as much. We call that infill, but you still got landscaping and, you know, nice streets and medium-sized blocks. CD5 is essentially your downtown. So this is your most urban, highest density area. You've got a tight network of streets, more than likely a grid pattern, which you already have here. Medium-sized blocks, and the buildings are really, really close to the sidewalk. And then we get into some special districts. So these are a little bit different from your typical character districts. It's usually more like industrial in nature. So SDLIV stands for Light Industrial Village. This is kind of a new concept, but it's really helpful because you've got your industrial, but you've also got housing. So it's really helpful for people who may work near where they live, where they work, near where they work. So you've also got a mix of uses, some light industrial, and more pedestrian friendly. And then we've got your SDRI, restricted industrial, and SDHI, heavy industrial. These are pretty similar, basically the same as what you currently have, as far as like lighter, medium industrial, and then your heavy is heavy industrial. So we didn't really change that. We usually don't in most of our codes. And then the last but not least is your civic district. So this is really important. This is where your civic spaces are, like Brian was talking about, civic areas that tend to get left over, but they're really prominent in a CDCV type of district. And then there's your overlays. So most of these we can't really do much about. They're largely influenced by either the state or federal regulations. So your historic district overlay is influenced by the state. There's not much we can do about that, but we do have it on your map. Floodplain overlay, Again, largely influenced by FEMA. And then your airport overlay for the Music City Executive Airport. One that is new is what we call the Rural Conservation Overlay. So essentially, this is aiding in some clustering of development. So what it would do is require a minimum of half of the development to be either CD1 or 2A, so your natural or agricultural. So you're really protecting farmland or open land as natural open space or farmland. And then the rest of that would be a mix of some single family, mixed use and civic, and some rural as well. So that's Article 3. Article 4 is a large portion of the document, but it's really, really helpful. We call it kind of the multi-page tables. So every district that we just went through has about 10 pages of regulations, but they're kind of organized in a way so it's a quick reference guide. So you can see in this district what is regulated, what's allowed, what's not allowed. So some of the examples that we have, just your lot size, lot width, setbacks. We incorporate facade standards. Facade, it's very important. It's what people are going to see from the street, so that's something that we like to regulate. Private frontage types and building types, which we'll get into. Civic space, all these things. I'll just go on to the next slide. But this is just an example of the spreads of what these districts may look like. So the first page, you've got the same rendering that we were just showing, and then the description. And then you get into the density that's allowed, lot occupation standards, setbacks, private frontage types, what's allowed in there, buildings, your building standards, so height, the height of the ceiling, building composition, facade, roof type, materials for both principal and accessory buildings. Uses just kicks you over to a different article, same with streets. Some of them it's just too much to put in this kind of summary table, but parking, loading and access, non-building components, civic space, landscaping. So all of these are kind of summarized here, but then they're a little further in depth in those relevant articles that it directs you to.
Thank you. Okay, next article is Article 5. It's one of the shortest articles in the entire ordinance. It's less than a page long. But it is pretty much all words in a table. At any rate, so how many residential density units can you have per gross area of district that you have? And that's the table. I won't walk you through all those. They're right. That same table is right in the code. The next article is about lots and building sites. And one of the principles that's in this article are lot layers. And if you just see this as every depth being a layer of that lot, the very front part of it is essentially the first lot layer, and it's the front setback essentially. And then you go 20 feet back of that, and that's the second layer. And then everything beyond that 20 feet back is the third lot layer. And we use those layers to regulate things like where does your garage go? Where does the swimming pool go? Where's the kids' playground stuff go? And so that's and then there are other places where actually different uses are regulated by where they occur on the lot. So that's lot layers. It's kind of a new concept, and we call them out by layers so we don't have to say what I just said every time we're talking about a particular place on the lot, because that's a lot of words right there when you're not just looking at it on an illustration. This article also covers setbacks and yard designations. The private frontage types are yours.
So I kind of briefly mentioned these earlier in the district multi-page tables, but these also range from kind of the most rural to the most urban as far as context. So we have a variety of types, and it's just what the front of the building looks like. So we start with a common yard, and then we move all the way down to like your shop front, gallery, office front. So they're going to be allowed in various districts, but this is just an example of one of those spreads would look like in that article. Similarly, we have building types. So again, starting with the most rural down to the most urban, or in this case, industrial, but big range of residential types: house, duplex, townhouse, and then we have small multifamily and large multifamily. Then you get into live-work buildings, commercial, mixed use, all of that. But each one has standards, and they're allowed in the applicable districts that make sense contextually. Uses. Your current ordinance does not have a use table, which can make it hard when you're trying to figure out what you can do in a specific district. So this took a lot of labor to kind of consolidate and make sure we got the districts right. But essentially, they're organized by category. So you've got residential uses, community facility type of civic uses, commercial, industrial, and then the list goes on. But it's a pretty succinct table. You've got principal uses, and then accessory, and then temporary uses. But the principal one is the largest. So basically, you can see the district at the top, and then you see the use down the side, and you just kind of line them up and see what is allowed. There's a few different types of permissions. First is just permitted by right. If it's allowed, it's allowed. Then there's permitted with conditions. So it may be permitted, but there are certain other like additional things that you may have to meet if it's noise or parking or just something to, keep your neighbors from still liking you or not liking you. Permitted by conditional use permit, so that would go to your Board of Zoning Appeals. And then it's not permitted, or like Bill talked about with those existing plan districts, that's just going to be per that plan that was submitted, or it's not regulated.
Thank you. Article 10 has standards on streets and internal drives and alleys, and just generally circulation of people and vehicles. Several different street types are laid out. This is just two of them. That is just a spread for an example. So you have an illustration of kind of what the street type is, and then all the standards that apply to it, and the districts in which those are appropriate. And they also vary by context, from very rural to very urban. And then there's a summary table that goes along with this that also says which street types are appropriate for use as certain street classifications, which is a kind of a federal concept of, you've heard us talk about arterials and collectors and local roads, and so which of these can be used for which of those classifications. Let's see here. Internal drives. Internal drives are essentially like the street that goes through a big shopping center. It's like a road. It's not entirely like a road, and so they're regulated to some extent, but not fully to the extent of roads. Alleys, if they're part of the plan. There's several of these districts where you may or may not have an alley at the rear, and it's just the standards for an alley if you have an alley. Block perimeter standards, which are really important because the bigger the block gets, the less walkable a place is. And so there's a limitation on how big a block is allowed in each of the various districts. There are a lot of access management standards, a lot of text. We won't make you read that tonight. And then different bikeway types. This also covers bikeways. I failed to say that a minute ago. I said it covered people and vehicles, but it also covered different bikeway types. This is, Article 11 covers a world of things having to do with vehicles and rear of house functions and that sort of thing. Biggest thing in here probably are the parking requirements. They're also presented by use and then how many units, how many parking places are required per size of building or numbers of residential units or whatever the appropriate measurement unit is. And they're all presented in a table. There's other sections on how big the parking spaces need to be and design of parking areas and parking lots, drive-through and drive-in standards. And part of that goes to, it's a good example of lot layers. Those typically are appropriate in the rear as opposed to the front of a building. Stacking spaces, that's the number of spaces that are required if you have a drive-in. The people who are waiting in a queue so that it doesn't get out into the street, the queue doesn't, and block traffic. Bicycle parking standards, loading space requirements, just what uses require a loading space and where it goes, and then location of the trash containers, where they go and how they need to be designed and that sort of thing. Me. Civic space. One of the things Brian showed you in the early on was open space designated just as open space without any standards as to what that open space is like versus actual civic space, which is also open space, but there are specific types of open space that are far more useful and important in creating the character of a place than the wasted space behind the subdivision, like that one photograph showed. In the civic space standards, if you think about like just some woods, while that's open space, it's a type of civic space at the same time, and that's the very first one, natural area. And then there are things like greens, and that's the way you can have a greenway running through your city. Squares and plazas are more formalized. Playgrounds for kids, sports fields, community gardens, which have become a pretty important and popular thing over the past several years. Pocket parks, just a small park, and then a dog park. And so there are standards for each of those and where they might be used. Landscape article it's an important article because it has a lot to do with beautification of the city. There are provisions about how much of a developed site needs to be landscaped as opposed to not landscaped. There are other provisions about how many plantings are required in certain contexts. There are tree charts that have references back to the Tennessee native tree tables. They require less irrigation and typically hardier than a lot of the cultivated species are. Public frontage. We haven't talked about public frontage. I should have a second ago when I was talking about the streets. The front part, let's see, everything from the curb to the building lot line is essentially the public frontage. And it includes a landscape strip, and it includes the sidewalk. And that's, when you look out, you see everything in the right-of-way that's not a vehicular lane, that's the public frontage. those vary just, with the road types, those vary by context. One of the things that's regulated is the shape of trees. There are certain trees that if you put an evergreen tree out on a street downtown like this, and it grows opaque all the way to the ground, blocks the frontage, and you don't know the buildings are there. So those are not allowed in that context, and there are different things allowed in different contexts. And then there are actually landscaping standards for how big the trees are planted, how big they need to be, and how you plant them, and that sort of thing. Not in this section. I'll just wait till I get to that. Never mind. It's an important thing that I want to talk about. Article 14. This covers fences and walls and screens, not like you put on your window, but screening of things you don't want to see from the frontage, and buffers. There are 3 types of buffers that are in the ordinance. They follow pretty closely to you have 2 types essentially now, but this has a 3rd one in it. But you have standards for each of the buffer types. The depth from the public frontage, the design of them, and that's in terms of what plant materials and how much plant materials that you have. There's opacity requirements, just how opaque is the buffer in terms of, how much can you see through it. Then there's a new buffer type that's called a scenic street buffer, and we heard a lot from everybody about wanting to retain the rural character of the place. This is designed to retain the rural character of places along thoroughfares that they're rural right now, and you want to keep that feel. And so it's essentially a setback from the street that can't be built in, and that's the essence of the scenic street buffer. That's just an illustration of it right there. We haven't figured out, and we hope to get some input from you guys. We haven't figured out exactly where this scenic street buffer idea could be applied. Staff told us one and maybe another, and those are the 2 that are up there now. One being Long Hollow Pike between Lower Station Camp Creek Road and Greenlee. We spelled it wrong. Greenlee Boulevard. It was on the sign out there. It's all one word. I saw when I drove in. Did I write that? I may have done that one. And then another one being on Big Station Camp Boulevard between Long Hollow Pike and Highway 386. The depth of these, of this type of buffer, it typically is somewhere between 100 and 200 feet. 150-foot setback starts giving you a pretty good rural feel. So that's the beginning of that concept. If y'all can think of other places that you're driving along, you go, that is a great rural setting right there. Some of those can start being pulled into this buffer type.
You had this one.
Oh gosh, this is one that Anna and I neither one wanted to do. Public and private lighting types. This is nothing more than what pole types for a lighting fixture and what head type are appropriate within various districts. Some of them, you can see that we don't have a lot of, we don't love Cobra lighting head types. These are all NPs. We do allow them over in the 2 industrial districts. Part of the street lighting, it's also in the public frontage. It really creates an important part of the streetscape, just like the trees do. So that's what this article's about. Now this one's yours, I know.
Article 16 is signs. So signs are should be pretty straightforward, but they can become a hot topic easily in a lot of cities. So hopefully this has kind of straightened that out. But again, we're going to get sick of us talking about context and rural to urban, but that also applies to signs. So I think there's 18, 19 types of signs that ultimately you get a menu of options, and they come with their own standards and what districts those should be allowed in. So this is just, again, a sample spread of what those standards would look like. But some of the other things that are covered in Article 16 include like signs that are not allowed and regulating temporary signs and how long they can be up and permitting and that type of process and more administrative things. But the bulk of this article is the various sign types that you may have. I'll talk about Article 17. This is just utilities and telecommunications. So pretty straightforward, but utilities, just where they can go. And most of them we're regulating, they must be underground as far as poles and cables and things like that. But then telecommunication towers and antennas, this pretty much was brought forward from your existing code. We can't do much about that. It's largely FCC regulated. So just kind of updated some of your graphics there and organize it as far as usability. So did you want to do 18?
Yeah. So we did spend some time thinking about protection of natural resources. People, like I said before, people were really focused on tree protection. We've brought in significant tree protection provisions into the new ordinance. There's a possibility, it's not a fully fleshed out concept yet, but the possibility of a tree bank being set up so that if somebody doesn't want to or can't for some reason put up trees that are required to be put up, there can be payments put into this tree bank to be spent on tree preservation elsewhere. Again, it's going to take some thought to flesh that out more, but right now it's set up as just an authorization for a tree bank to be set up. Provisions about tree removal, there's specimen tree provisions in there. When somebody submits a development plan, they have to talk about the trees they're preserving versus the trees they're pulling out. And there are other provisions about just the protection of tree canopies as well. All of that's done in, a lot of it's done in tabular form. This article also has a steep slope provision in it where slopes are protected. And I haven't always lived here in Tennessee, but I love the hilliness of it. And you can see in some cities where they've like allowed a developer come in and just cut the top off of a hill and just build on it. This is trying to protect that, keep that from happening, so that you can only build a certain way up the hill so that the hilltop stays intact and that kind of thing.
I'll add too before I go to the next slide. I promise we can count. Article 19 was in the Clyde draft, and then staff decided that doesn't apply to Gallatin. So we've removed it, but it is reserved just for to make our lives a little bit easier.
And for some other topic to go in there someday.
Yes, it may be added later.
And I'm not going to go through this part at all closely. It is a very important part of the document. I personally probably spent more time on Article 21 than any part of the entire ordinance. It has to do, well, first of all, the Article 20 deals with the administration of the code and who makes decisions and goes through all of that. Article 21 is about any development proposal that must require approval from Planning Commission or City Council or both. It's all covered here. This also covers things like administrative adjustments and temporary use permits and certificates of occupancy before you can move into a building, a world of things, rezonings, sign and fence permits. Y'all have a very, very rigorous fence permitting process that I've never seen anywhere before, but y'all got it nailed. And we always like to, we make a joke about sign permits. I don't tell jokes very well, but Brian always says, have you seen the buildings they're putting those signs on? And meaning the signs in a lot of places are regulated more diligently than the buildings are. So, and then Article 22 is just enforcement of the ordinance. Somebody violates it, what's happened, they get a notice, they get a chance to correct it. The city has remedies that they can enforce against them, and some of those remedies may be penalties. And that's the end of that one.
Almost there. This is the last article. This is definitions. Pretty straightforward, but it's also pretty visual, so hopefully it's more user-friendly than what you currently have. I think it is. But the idea is that anything in the code that is capitalized, the first letter is capitalized, that should mean it's defined. We are human and we make mistakes, so let us know if there's one that should or shouldn't be defined, but I think we caught them all. And then this is your zoning map. Don't worry, it will be online for you to look at, so you can study it in detail. But that's just a quick glimpse at it.
Each of those colors
Is a different district.
is a different district.
Yep.
And it tells you what districts are over there, the
Yeah.
districts that we just ran through earlier.
Yeah, and as Bill mentioned, a lot of the city is under a master plan district, and you can kind of see what that looks like here because the tan is the existing plan district. So there's quite a lot of that in the city. So there's only so much we can do, but we did try our best to implement character-based when possible. So at the beginning, Brian mentioned what we heard during all of our public engagement. So just a quick run through to show how we've tried to address those things. So we talked about how you wanted Gallatin's character to be preserved, largely the rural parts of Gallatin. So as we mentioned, that rural conservation overlay district should aid with some of that, as well as the scenic street buffers. Buildings should be designed to last. We have pretty good building standards as far as the architectural elements on them, and then the just various different building types that you can use. Trees and other features, natural features to be preserved, like you mentioned, the tree preservation and tree bank idea that's in Article 18. Traffic calming measures, like you talked about in Article 10, we've got sidewalks and street trees and bike lanes and all those things that should help make the automobile experience a little more pleasant, but also for the pedestrian, and should calm them as far as driving goes. Various housing types people wanted, and that's presented in your building types article. Gateways into the city need aesthetic improvement, so that's largely a mapping thing. Just trying to make sure that the appropriate district is along those gateways. And then again, Article 10 with the streets, that should help improve the aesthetics of your gateways. Same thing for multimodal transportation, as we touched on with sidewalks, bike lanes, and road improvements. Expanding outdoor dining, that is an accessory use in your use table, and it's allowed in all of your mixed-use districts. And then finally, creating meaningful public open spaces, so your civic space types that we've provided should really, really help with that. So next steps, quick explanation of how we're going to be taking comments over the next month. So the public review period is for 30 days, starting tomorrow. So that leaves you through July 19th to submit comments, and there's a couple ways you can do that. The first is through zoco@gallatintn.gov, and you just email directly your comments there. Or on our website, zocogallatin.com, there is a public draft page, and that's where you will find the code and the map. And then there's like a form at the bottom, so you can put your name if you want to, your email, and then any comments that you have, and those will still be directed to that email. So the idea is that staff will get all of those comments, and then they'll compile them, and then they'll send them to us after July 19th. And then just overview of the schedule. So we started out, like we said last year, with a kickoff and moved through the drafting phase, and now we are at the public draft presentation phase. We're almost there. So, and that's all we've got. They're still awake.
Up in the back.
Questions?
Yeah, questions, comments? Yes. Go ahead.
This is the first time I've come to one of these, so forgive me if this has already been addressed in earlier presentations. So I don't know anything about building or city planning either, but I'm assuming that there's some kind of standard like we want this much green space and we want this percent density, we want this percent walkability, et cetera. So based on what you've planned, how close are we to like those standards of like the cities that we want to live in? And being that nothing can be retroactivated, how close will Gallatin be able to achieve that? Because it seems like we've had an excessive amount of building in the last 5 to 10 years that as great as this is, it almost seems like this is great, but it's too late.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a fair point. So we can't do anything about what's come before for sure. So you're right about that. So basically what will happen is as new developments are proposed, they'll be subject to these standards, and you have things like a requirement of civic space percentages and all of that is based on these best practices of these most loved places. So, but however, there are many places around the country that we work where we're actually called in to redevelop places that were kind of done in a way that wasn't quite as holistically thinking about things, to make them better and, all of that. So one of the things that typically happens most easily is the redevelopment of some of the commercial corridors, because they're always kind of changing. Houses, not so much, but commercial stuff. So as new things are built, they will be always sort of moving to this new sort of better, more walkable, more aesthetically pleasing kind of character. So, yes.
Do we have the statistics on the people that are walking on the sidewalks and the bicycles that are using the bike lanes? I have to be honest, in 2 years, I've seen one person use the bike lanes.
Yeah.
One person.
Yeah.
I drove and I tried to avoid the traffic the other day at 2:20 in the afternoon, just coming from my house on the western side of Gallatin, just trying to get into downtown. 1.7 miles.
Yep.
Over 11 minutes.
Yeah.
It's unacceptable. We're from Long Island, Levittown. Maybe some of you might have heard
Oh, yeah.
we're suburban
Right.
neighborhood. You all haven't learned anything.
Yeah.
You all haven't learned anything. Like, you really haven't learned anything.
Yeah.
Because you're worse, because we go back frequently, you're actually worse than Long Island. Or down, which is 47 miles from New York City. You're worse. Just saying.
Well, I'm not from here, so I'm not. But I know what you mean. So, the question was, do we have statistics about the usage of the bike lanes and sidewalks and things? The answer is no, we don't. But what we know is that if we don't have pedestrian or cycle facilities, they certainly won't be used because they're not there. And the problem is, though, often when we see people putting in bike lanes or new sidewalks, it's great that they're there, but the experience of it's like that theoretical pedestrian with the 18-wheeler going by them. It's like, have you really created a place where someone wants to walk unless it's an emergency, right? And so that's the thing. Yes, a sidewalk next to the highway is better than walking on the gravel shoulder, but it's still not the ideal. So ultimately, as growth and development occurs, new neighborhoods go in, new commercial development goes in. Now we have a situation where the whole experience will be thought about, including the sidewalk or bike facility, but also you're creating places that people want to bike or walk past. Your traffic problems that you have here, they will persist for a long time. You have your major thoroughfare plan that's seeking to address those sorts of things. But ultimately, a lot of times, what's done is done. The biggest reason, just to share a secret with you, the biggest reason that most suburban or most cities that are predominantly suburban in nature have traffic problems is because for the longest time after World War II, developments were created that didn't connect to each other. So all of those, every time you see a cul-de-sac, that cul-de-sac, well, you may go like, oh, it's so nice, I feel so safe, no one's coming through my neighborhood or whatever, but you've also precluded the possibility of connecting to another street. Now every trip is going onto those roads. And so your development has, not because you've just created development, but because of the nature of that development, how it's laid out, has created the traffic problem, which is why you can see areas that are much more dense that have not nearly as many traffic problems as you do in some of these more suburban areas. So, next question. Yes, please.
The picture of all the zoning map,
Yes.
is that determined now, or is that what we're trying to decide?
Oh, yeah, you can mark that up.
So that is not in stone or anything?
Nothing's in stone.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess Brian might be able to answer this question. Is the current development that's going on, that horrible, horrible development, included in this new zoning plan?
If it's already going on, it's too late.
So, follow up. Is that why the speed of development has been going on, so they can rush these things through?
No, if they, well, I would just guess that it's already been entitled.
So the short answer on that is development has been at a fast pace now for 10 plus years here in Gallatin. And it's likely that most of those developers had no idea that we were going to decide to update our zoning ordinance. This is in large part a response to all of those requests. And so we're trying to now get ourselves to a point where what comes in the future is going to be a lot better. So we do have to live with what we had, which was not as good of an ordinance as what we hopefully now will get. But once a developer has an entitlement that they've been granted through an approval, they are able to go ahead and develop that as it was approved under the old ordinance. And there's really not a whole lot that anybody could do to stop that at this point in time. So hopefully that answers your question.
Not only is there not a whole lot you can do, there's nothing you can do, right? And I think that's but that said, that's a great segue into my number one recommendation to you is don't take years to adopt this ordinance, because in the meantime, more things that you may not like are going to be approved under the old ordinance. So don't think that just because we're releasing this, draft online, that now all new development is going to follow this. It absolutely will not. So the faster you get it adopted, the faster you're protected. So it doesn't, in perfect, it sometimes is what did I say? Perfect is the enemy of good. Yes. Yeah. So yes, ma'am.
Can we incentivize the old ugly things that if you make them comply a little bit with these new ideas, we will give you some kind of incentive?
Yeah, so sometimes what we find is because the intended outcome of development would be more varied, more mixed, more whatever, that instead of doing just a single use subdivision with only single family houses that are all nearly identical to one another, they go like, oh wow, that's actually kind of interesting. I could, I'm not having to put all my eggs in that one basket. I can have a mix of different sizes or types within the development. And so they could, sort of see that as a benefit. In some cases, depending on the density numbers, they may actually be able to get a few more units even, but it will be a better and more interesting development. So there's an example, we were working on a zoning ordinance one time, and there was a developer who was well on their way and they were going to be approved before the ordinance, but they realized once they saw the draft, like, oh, that draft is actually going to be the citizens might actually like what we're doing instead of having these signs against us. And two, we could do some more interesting and some more with our land than we could have otherwise. So we're actually going to put the brakes on and we're going to wait a few months until it's adopted. And so hopefully there will be some of that happening as well. So, Yes.
So, in the case of a redevelopment, not a new development,
Oh, he's trying to get the mic to you. Sorry. 1 second. It's for the viewing audience at home.
oh, not a problem. Okay. So, if there's a redevelopment of an existing building, commercial, retail, whatever it is, will that, once the new zoning ordinance is in place, will that take precedent for the redevelopment?
Yes, it would. Yeah. Do you want to take that, or is the answer just yes? They'll have to follow the new ordinance. Well, wait for the mic.
The answer is yes, but it's nuanced depending on how much they're redeveloping. What, are they just adding a little bit to what they already have or not? And so, but if somebody comes in, there's one exception to this I'll tell you about. If somebody comes in and just raises the site, they then typically have to build back under the new ordinance. Multifamily buildings, not so. That's correct, right, Brian? I said that right? I think that's right. Under the non-conforming uses provisions that I talked about, there is one exception which says basically that you can take down a multifamily building and rebuild it under how it was originally built. As you know, they apparently had a huge lobbying effort to make that beat state law, but that's state law.
Oh wow, interesting. Yeah, yeah. Who's next?
Thank you, Brian. I was excited when you started the process, and like I told you before, I was expecting to be excited more. I think you guys have done a fantastic job, and I'm just wait to go home and dive into every piece of the document and see what we can do with it. But I agree with you, we're going to have to go the speed of light and pass that to try to curtain a little what's happening. But again, thanks for being with us. Thanks for listening to us, and we spend time on the phone, and I appreciate the effort. So we'll try to push that. Good.
Great, thank you. And that said, too, while some places we work, when I give them that advice of don't take forever to adopt it, some people say, but we may miss something, we may make a mistake or whatever. And that's the thing that's great about a zoning ordinance is you can actually, without much difficulty, make an amendment to it, right? And so you go like, oh, it's in place, and then the first application comes through, and you go like, oh wow, that would have been good if we had done that a little differently. You go like go ahead and fix that, And so it isn't just like, you get your ordinance and now that's what you have for the next 20 years. So who has the mic?
Legally, you have now there is 30 days public comment,
Yes.
and after that, you guys redraft.
Yep.
How fast are you going to redraft?
It depends on how many comments you have. If you follow the staff's direction, it might be a while, but
No, we'll get the staff out of there. Well, the staff, they done.
They already did their part.
They
That's
done.
right.
They did
That's
the work.
right.
So,
That's right.
how fast can we expect you to do?
1 to 2 months, I would say.
Nah, that's too much.
Yes. Oh, here it is.
One of the things that we typically see between this public draft stage and final draft stage is there may be some particular comments that come in on particular things, but it's typically not a ton of comments.
Yeah, we usually don't get very many public comments, surprisingly.
Yeah. And so, in that case, probably a month.
Yeah. If we do get a lot of comments, usually a developer has hired a consultant to go through the code and find all the things that they don't like and put them
Correct.
forward as comments.
Correct.
So,
Will you be publishing the public comments?
we typically don't. No.
That went back here too.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
You can go ahead, and then in the back we got some. Yeah.
once this is adopted, will this go to you? Will you be in charge of this, Brian, or will that still be the city council that holds the enforcement of things?
So the city council would be in charge of adopting the ordinance as it's presented to them, and or making any amendments in their process. But once that's been adopted, it's my department's charge to enforce it. So we would take it and make sure that any proposed developments are, lining up with what's in the ordinance.
In the back.
Well, I guess that was pretty much my question. What this lady asked was, how easy would it be to come in, for a developer to come in and say, well, I want to go back to what we were doing in 2025? How difficult is that going to be to enforce and to stand behind?
Yes, so they can't go back to the old code.
They cannot.
No.
I mean, because I've seen zonings go from R20 to R8 that's been the thing here lately.
Yep. Yeah, so I'm guessing there's a process for.
Anybody can come in and.
Hold on 1 second. Microphone's coming.
I just think I talked about it anyway. Anybody can come in and ask for a rezoning to change the district. That's going to continue, but they're not going to be able to go in and change to one of the old districts. That ordinance is repealed when this one is adopted.
And so, for instance, all of the new districts are this sort of character-based, that has, and so they may say, well, I'd like to be in a character district that is, more dense than the one I'm in now or something. And so let's say that everyone agrees and the, council decides to do that. It's still going to be great. It's just going to be maybe more dense or whatever. But, it's still the process they have to go through. Everybody will give their comments, and then, then they have to vote and decide and all that. But it's not like, oh no, all is lost. Now we have this bad thing. It's just maybe it's different than what we're hoping for or whatever. But it's pretty tight. So, yes.
Just one more comment on that. So, as we mentioned previously, there are multiple developments that are already in the process, right? So any of those developments that have come in and gotten an approval, you may not have seen any building on the property because it takes a while for those things to happen. So there may be projects that you'll still see after this gets adopted that do develop under the old standards because they got their approvals that way. And they still have that entitlement. But if they ever do let their entitlement lapse, then they would be subject to the new standards and go forward that way. So if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's always sad because a lot of times one of the first developments that happen after the code's adopted are the ones that were from the old, they got approved under the old ordinance, and everybody's like, oh, gosh, this didn't help at all. This just looks like the old stuff. So, yes, sir.
The way it's worked in the past, I live on Timber Lane, which I now call Timberless Lane because they've knocked every tree out there down.
Yeah.
And it was in our neighborhood, the average homeowner had 4.1 acres. And I worked with the city, I worked with the developer, but it's just a rubber stamp almost. They just change it consistently to R8. Mm-hmm. And I've often wondered, what happened to R15 or R20? I walked through a development here in Gallatin recently, Savannah. Beautiful homes. They have probably the average lots an R20, maybe even an R40. But when I came to the city and and I've met with Mr. Rose, and they weren't supposed to have any construction and traffic on Timber Lane, and I live at the very end on a dead-end road. I counted the other day, there were 11 construction vehicles on Timber Lane. And I would recommend anybody from here at the city. And I met with Mr. Rose, and I spent probably 2 hours with him. We had a nice meeting, and he said, Mr. Binkley, we're not going to have any traffic on Timber Lane, not construction traffic. Mm-hmm. And I go through there 2 or 3 times a day, constant, parked all along the edge of the road. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like it's too late. I mean, I love your presentation. I love the ideas. But what's happened in the past, a developer will come in, and if it's R40 or it's agricultural, they instantly go to an R8. Is that still going to happen?
No, we don't have R8 anymore.
You don't have an R8 PUD.
No. We don't have a PUD. No, there's no PUDs anymore either. So there's none of this like. Yeah, the old PUDs that are there, right, and that have been approved or be there. But what we're trying to do is not have new development be this negotiated, subjective kind of a thing. Like, hey, I don't really like the zoning, so I want to do something else, and I'm going to go through a process, and then I can get approved to ignore the zoning. One of the things, while somebody can, as my dad said, somebody can request a zoning change, as they always can. It's just state law that allows you to make zoning changes, but they can't say, I'd like to make this timberless lane. I want to cut down all the trees, because we have our tree preservation stuff that is persistent regardless of what character district you're in. So some of those things that are perturbances and sort of making having a negative impact on the overall city will be dealt with regardless. The construction traffic, for instance, that's just an enforcement thing. If they're not supposed to be there and they are, then that's, the ordinance can say what it does. It has to be enforced. So maybe we'll get one of those game cameras, and put it out there and get some footage. So.
And one more thing. It's like when this development started probably 18 months ago, 2 years ago, and we met with the proposed developer of the property, which was Smith Douglas out of Atlanta, went to a meeting. I actually drove to Lebanon and looked at one of their projects, which was basically an R8 PUD. But then when it came time to start developing, I found out, well, Smith Douglas, they've withdrawn from it. So all the meetings we had with them, with the neighbors, it didn't amount to anything, because now Lennar is doing it. Mm. And it's like they can just change in the middle of the stream, and the homeowners out there, we have no input into it.
Yeah. Yeah, and so here's one of the things. The character of development shouldn't be dependent on who's the developer, right? So one developer following the zoning ordinance should give you something that the next developer following the zoning ordinance does, right? Their architecture may be a little different or whatever, but it shouldn't be like, oh no, all is lost. Now, that said, and the reason why I said a lot of times what we'll get is, developers or home builders will have a consultant review the draft ordinance and say all the things they don't like, is because as we've been instructed by the community and everybody, if we don't want cookie cutter subdivision, so like you said, you went over to Lebanon and it was basically an R8 PUD. Well, the Lebanon zoning ordinance isn't the same zoning ordinance you have here. Funny that it makes the same thing over there as it does here, right? And so there can be challenges, for a conventional home builder to just crank out the same old thing, which is, I think, kind of what you guys asked for, and so hopefully, we'll solve that issue of you having to worry about, well, that developer seems good, but that developer doesn't. So, who has the mic? Yes.
I do. So my other question, I guess, goes with, on this zoning, are the government buildings part of the zone? This is part A. Are the government buildings part of the zoning so that we know those government buildings will not be relocated or changed? And then my part 2 would be, is the Phoenix project that has been cloaked in secrecy, is that part of this? Because we all know it's out there. We know the Phoenix project is something that is being discussed. The council has given approval on that. So I'd like to know, was there any consideration on the Phoenix project when you were looking at this planning? And again, does this allow or disallow for, say, the police department and the fire department to be moved or sold, or even City Hall? I'd like those answers on that.
Sure. Yeah. So government buildings aren't subject to zoning. They're able to. Go ahead.
They are to some extent.
Speaking out of turn here. So.
And they are regulated under the zoning ordinance. You can't say that ever about anything. The city council decides what happens to those properties unless they're in some sort of land trust or preservation trust or something like that. Yeah.
Again, Phoenix project.
I've never heard. I've
Also-
never heard of the Phoenix project, so we did not consider it.
The board is discussing being allowed it, so.
Just to give an answer on that, the city council has only entered into a contract to work with a developer to come up with a potential design on that project. And at some point in time, they may decide to move forward and do a project with them. But that decision has not been made yet.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I do believe it said enter into discussions on the agenda and on the minutes. So what does that specifically mean? Is it a foilable document that us citizens can then get because it entered into discussions? That was on the minutes, it's also on the agenda, that's just my question.
I'm not sure what you're referring to. I'm sorry. I don't know the answer to what you're referring to. I can tell you I know that Project Phoenix is not an approved done deal project. It's not to that point. So that's something that the city council will consider and ultimately at some point decide on, but that has not happened yet.
This has an exciting name. Phoenix. Phoenix
for
is
sure.
rising.
That's for the legal side because you're talking about, and looks like you're talking about experience that developer hire consultants to go through every word and through a bunch of comments. Are we protected to have 10 developers sending you thousands of requests who's going to push and push and push for months and months, that knowingly that the intent behind it is maybe they have something in the pipe they're going to bring and they don't like what they see because that's not going to be, they're going to have to go through a new process who's not going to be what they build, the box and the box and the box. Right. So they're going to send you thousands of comments you guys are going to have to go through, and that's going to take 6 months, where that time they're going to be able to push their project. So do we have a way to limit this kind of action who doesn't follow the intent of the comments?
Yeah. So I mean, 30 days is a pretty quick turnaround, for a review. The thing about it is, I mean, yeah, I guess there is a point at which there's just so many comments we just can't get through them. It'd take a lot of comments to do that. Just because we get a comment doesn't mean that it's going to be implemented. And so, like, for instance, if someone makes a comment and it is contra to all of the stuff we heard during the public input process and what the comp plan says or whatever the case may be, that's why we do that public process, And so if it's not in keeping with that, then, that's not a thing that we would be doing. Now, that said, the comments are going to staff. Staff is the one who ultimately has to go through all of the comments, and then we get our distilled set of, like, here are the comments. Now, there are times when, sometimes we get comments back and we, like, oh yeah, here's an edit that should be made, and we say, like, remember the public process? Like, so we will advocate, on behalf of that, because our process is something that we hold to be very sacred to us, and so we will continue to advocate for all of you who aren't in that part of the discussions.
And nothing against you, because I like what you did from day one, but we kind of got burned with Plan Gallatin when Plan Gallatin was through. Because
For those who don't know, we didn't do Plan Gallatin.
No, you didn't do that. That's not against you, but I was actually able to get a copy of the comments, the public comments on Plan Gallatin, and if you read that, I think I sent you one when you started the process. When you read the comments and when you look at Plan Gallatin, it's totally opposite of what the people wanted. So we got burned on that. That's why I was wondering, And actually, I would like for transparency for people to have access to the public comments. And I think that should be published, even if it's published at the end when everything there, but for transparency and to make sure that the process is followed. I think public should have access to public comments.
I believe it's foilable too.
Yeah, well, I mean, once those comments go in to staff, you know, they're in. So they'll, to your point, they would be available regardless of. Right.
Instead of making us
Right.
spend the money and play
Right.
games.
Right. Back to the front.
Thank you. It's exactly what I wanted to bring up. I think part of my frustration is that for everything going in, we seem to have to come into every single meeting to say no, 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 no,
Yes.
and it keeps getting pushed through. And you know, it's the council, but by having the public comments, they would have in front of them the way people feel already without having to come in here and make speeches.
Yeah. Well, and ultimately, what should happen when the new ordinance is adopted is you all have participated. You know what the ordinance says. You like what the ordinance is supposed to deliver. You don't have to come to development hearings anymore.
But the contractors and the developers keep pushing these to the limits. And then
Right.
we have to keep coming in and saying, no, 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 stop that, stop
Right,
that,
but
stop that.
I guess what I'm saying is because we don't have PDs anymore, and we don't have all of these sort of subjective things, like these are the rules are what they are, and so unless somebody's coming for a rezoning, maybe, for instance, then you might come and say, well, I don't like the zoning district that they're asking for, or I don't like that zoning district being there. That's not the right spot for that zoning district. I like the zoning district, just not there, so, yes.
Just one comment. I meant to say it before Pascal left. He may still be, he can't hear me through the door though. So it's very unusual that we get a significant amount or quantity of comments from developers at all. It's very uncommon.
Yeah, it's always odd to me.
They do it at lunch.
Or the golf course.
Exactly.
Well,
Sorry.
Well, they don't talk to us at lunch, and they don't talk to staff at lunch, and
You just hear it through the grapevine.
but y'all need to realize that the entire process of amending a zoning ordinance still is yet to come. It's still got to go through the planning commission. It's still got to go through the city council, and that's all of this that we've been doing is complete icing on the cake of the process that usually cities do in adopting a zoning ordinance. All of this public outreach, it's just not commonly done. They usually just draft it up, send it to planning commission, goes to city council, it's done. So.
Yeah, and so one thing to take note of, sounds like you will be particularly interested in, the section that deals with the administration of the code and the process and whatever. And so you'll see like, okay, well, what when somebody comes in with an application for development, you know, is staff just looking at it and reviewing and going like, yes, this follows the rules, so you're approved? Or are they now going to some, you know, elected or appointed officials, and then they're going like, well, we kind of like what they're doing. Actually, let's not do the zoning ordinance as they said, what the zoning ordinance says. We'll do something different. And so just make sure that it tracks, and you go like, oh yeah, we're sufficiently protected based on how the ordinance is set up, because there's portions of the ordinance that are dealing with those things specifically. So, sir.
Thank you. I was wanting to confirm that the new zoning map that you'd shown earlier on one of the screens is going to supplant the existing zoning map. So every parcel, every lot in the city is going to be redesignated with a new zoning classification. So you're going to be creating a lot of non-conforming uses and conforming lots, setbacks, you name it. There'll be a lot of non-conformities immediately created. There are a lot of covenants and restrictions in a lot of these places as well that might not mesh well with those new provisions that you're looking at. Of course, I'll be looking at that later on. So I want you to be careful about how you might be able to accommodate all of those various covenants and restrictions that exist as well. So to less complicate that process and create that as part of a vesting, because people are going to add on, tear down places are going to be tearing down their homes and rebuilding homes, especially along the lake and so forth. So
Right.
those standards are going to float in and out, it seems. So
Yes.
to be wary of that. So
Sure.
don't be surprised, everybody, if you find out that your property's not zoned what it is, because it's going to change.
Right.
And,
So it'll have a new name for sure. But like, so for instance, you mentioned legal nonconformities and things. Like all of the existing nonconformities that are there currently too will persist. So you have them now in the city all over the place too. And so in the way that we said that the PDs that are in place will persist, obviously because we've done this a million times all over the country, we've run into this same thing a million times. And so we know how to deal with it. But take a look at how we have dealt with it and make sure, it makes sense to you. So.
We're only going to have 12 classifications. That is correct, because I wrote them all down as you went through.
14
Because of the historic
in
districts.
in the industrial, couple of industrials. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So simpler.
Yep.
Yep. Yes.
This is my first meeting.
Welcome.
Thank you. So the plan Gallatin that was done a few years back, so that's going out of the window with this. Is
No.
that correct?
No, Plan Gallatin is your comprehensive plan.
Okay.
And so that's like at a higher level. It's kind of like vision and intent and policies and all of that stuff. And then the zoning ordinance is intended to essentially the rules and regulations that move that and implement that, move it forward.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Second question, Phoenix project, that's new to me. Unless, are y'all referring to the City Hall renovation?
Yes, that's
okay.
a nod to
All
it.
right. I'm aware of that then.
Yes.
Thank you.
Who else? I hear the dinner bell. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you all so much for coming and giving us your evening, participating. We'll be just moving forward from here. Check online tomorrow to get the drafts, read it, do what you want, send your comments in, and continue to participate in these meetings because we need your input. Have a good night.